Delbert Hartwell was repairing fence on his 400-acre Wyoming ranch when he heard the sound that made every rancher's heart sink, the weak, labored breathing of dying livestock. At 54, he'd been working the same land his grandfather had homesteaded in 1923, and he knew the difference between an animal resting and an animal in serious distress. Following the sound up a rocky slope about 2 miles from his property line, Delbert found an old Hereford bull lying in the sparse grass, clearly abandoned and near death. The animal was massive in frame but catastrophically thin, his ribs showing through matted, filthy fur. Infected wounds covered his legs, and his eyes were clouded with what looked like chemical burns. "Jesus Christ," Delbert muttered, pulling out his cell phone to call his neighbor and closest friend, Neville Kincaid, who ran the adjacent ranch. "Neville, I need you to bring your trailer up to Bear Creek Ridge. Found a bull up here that's been left to die, and he's in bad shape." Neville arrived within 30 minutes, taking one look at the animal and shaking his head in disgust. "Del, somebody dumped this poor bastard up here hoping nobody would find him. Look at those chemical burns on his hide. That's not accidental." The two men managed to get the bull into Neville's livestock trailer and transported him back to Delbert's ranch, where they immediately called Dr. Maxine Phelps, the veterinarian who served ranchers throughout their part of Carbon County. Dr. Phelps arrived an hour later and spent 45 minutes examining the bull with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd been treating ranch animals for 22 years. Her diagnosis was both professional and furious. "Delbert, this animal has been systematically poisoned with industrial chemicals. These burns are from direct contact with substances that have no business being anywhere near livestock. The respiratory damage suggests he's been breathing contaminated air for months, and the organ damage..." She paused, clearly struggling to control her anger. "Somebody's been using this bull as a test subject, then dumped him when he was too sick to be useful. Who'd do something like this? Someone with enough money to consider a $15,000 breeding bull disposable and enough arrogance to think they can dump poisoned animals on public land without consequences." Dr. Phelps scanned the identification tag in the bull's ear with her handheld reader. The information that appeared made all three ranchers go silent. "This bull belongs to Crosswind Beef Corporation. Their main processing facility is about 40 miles northeast of here, and according to this tag, his name is registered as Thunder Ridge Champion. He's worth at least $20,000. Delbert felt his stomach drop. Crosswind Beef was the massive corporate operation that had been aggressively buying up family ranches throughout Carbon County for the past 3 years, offering prices that seemed generous, until local families realized they'd signed contracts that also transferred water and mineral rights for practically nothing. "Why would Crosswind abandon a $20,000 bull?" Neville asked. "Because treating him would cost money and raise questions about what they've been doing to their livestock," Dr. Phelps replied grimly. "Easier to let him die in the wilderness and report him missing or killed by predators." That evening, as Delbert worked to make the sick bull comfortable in his barn, he began researching Crosswind Beef Corporation online. What he discovered kept him awake most of the night. Over the past 5 years, Crosswind had been cited 17 times by the EPA for environmental violations at their Wyoming facilities. They'd paid over $800,000 in fines for illegally dumping chemical waste into groundwater sources that supplied drinking water to rural communities. Most disturbing of all, they'd been linked to a cluster of cancer cases in the town of Riverside, where their largest processing plant had been operating since 2019. But the information that really caught Delbert's attention was buried in a lawsuit filed by former Crosswind employees. According to court documents, the company had been conducting illegal experiments on livestock using industrial chemicals banned by the FDA, testing the effects of various substances on meat quality and animal growth rates. The abandoned bull wasn't just evidence of animal cruelty. He was proof of systematic violations of federal food safety laws that could potentially contaminate the entire American beef supply. The next morning, Delbert called the Wyoming Department of Agriculture to report his discovery. The response he received was polite but frustrating. "Mr. Hartwell, we appreciate your concern, but unless you can prove the animal was deliberately harmed, this appears to be a case of livestock wandering off and getting injured. Crosswind Beef has an excellent reputation with our department, and we have no current investigations involving their operations." Excellent reputation? They've been fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for environmental violations. Those were minor infractions that have been resolved through proper channels. I'd suggest you contact Crosswind directly about returning their property. The dismissive response told Delbert everything he needed to know about how deep Crosswind's influence reached into state regulatory agencies. But it also convinced him that the dying bull in his barn represented evidence that could expose crimes affecting thousands of people. That afternoon, he received a visit that confirmed his suspicions. Two men in expensive suits arrived at his ranch in a black sedan with Colorado plates, introducing themselves as representatives of Crosswind Beef Corporation's legal department. "Mr. Hartwell, we understand you found some livestock that belongs to our company," the senior attorney said with practiced corporate politeness. "We'd like to arrange immediate pickup and provide compensation for any veterinary expenses you've incurred. Before we discuss pickup, I'd like to know how a $20,000 prize bull ended up abandoned and dying 40 miles from your facility, with chemical burns all over his body." The attorney's expression hardened slightly. "Our preliminary investigation suggests the animal escaped during routine transport and was subsequently injured by predators or natural hazards. There's no evidence of any negligence on our company's part." "Natural hazards that cause chemical burns?" "Mr. Hartwell, I'd strongly recommend against making unfounded accusations that could damage our company's reputation. Crosswind Beef Corporation has significant legal resources, and we take defamation very seriously. False claims could result in lawsuits that would be financially devastating for a small operation like yours." The threat was delivered with corporate smoothness, but Delbert had spent his entire adult life fighting Wyoming weather, market volatility, and economic uncertainty. He wasn't about to be intimidated by lawyers in expensive suits. "Gentlemen, that bull stays here until Dr. Phelps certifies he's healthy enough to be moved safely. If your company has questions about his condition, you're welcome to explain to federal agricultural inspectors why he was found dying from systematic chemical poisoning." After the lawyers left, Delbert knew he'd started a war he might not be able to win. Crosswind had the resources to crush him financially and legally, but the bull named Thunder Ridge Champion represented evidence that could save his entire community from environmental poisoning and corporate exploitation. That night, as he checked on the recovering animal, Delbert made a decision that would either expose one of the biggest agricultural scandals in Wyoming history or cost him everything his family had built over 3 generations. Thunder Ridge Champion looked at him with eyes that were clearing as the chemicals worked out of his system, and Delbert saw intelligence, dignity, and a will to survive that matched his own. The corporate war for Wyoming's ranch lands was about to begin, and an abandoned bull was going to be the evidence that brought down an empire built on lies, poison, and greed. 2 days after the lawyer's visit, Delbert was surprised to see his neighbor Roxanne Caldwell driving up his gravel driveway in her beat-up Ford pickup. Roxanne owned a small ranch about 5 miles east of his property, and while they'd been cordial neighbors for years, she rarely made social visits during calving season. "Delbert, I heard about the bull you found," she said without preamble as she stepped out of her truck. "I think we need to talk about some things I've been keeping to myself." At 48, Roxanne had been running her 300-acre ranch alone since her husband died in a farm accident 3 years earlier. She was known throughout Carbon County as one of the toughest, most capable ranchers in the area, which made the obvious fear in her eyes all the more unsettling. "What kind of things?" "The kind that explain why you found that Crosswind bull dying in the wilderness. The kind that could get us both killed if the wrong people find out we're talking." Roxanne followed him into his kitchen, accepting a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly. For several minutes, she sat silently, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "Delbert, 6 months ago, I was approached by a man named Curtis Pemberton, who claimed to work for an environmental consulting firm. Said they were conducting a study on water quality in rural Wyoming and wanted permission to take samples from my wells and streams." "Did you let them?" "Yeah, I did. Seemed legitimate. He had official-looking credentials, talked about government funding for agricultural research, even paid me $200 for my cooperation. But after he left, I started noticing things." "What kind of things?" "Dead fish in my creek, cattle getting sick after drinking from certain water sources. My milk production dropped 40%, and the veterinarian couldn't explain why. Then I started seeing unmarked trucks on back roads at night, always heading toward the old mining areas north of here." Delbert felt ice forming in his stomach. The abandoned mining sites Roxanne was describing were less than 10 miles from where he'd found Thunder Ridge Champion, and they were directly upstream from several ranches that supplied water to the town of Millbrook. "Did you report any of this to authorities?" Roxanne's laugh was bitter. "I tried. Called the sheriff's department, the EPA, even the state agricultural office. Know what I was told? That isolated incidents of livestock illness weren't unusual, that old mines sometimes leak naturally occurring chemicals, and that I was probably just dealing with normal environmental fluctuations. But you didn't believe that. Hell no. So I started doing my own investigating, followed those unmarked trucks one night, and watched them dump industrial waste directly into Bear Creek, the same creek that feeds the water supply for half the ranches in this county." The implications hit Delbert like a physical blow. Bear Creek was the primary water source for his own cattle, and it ran directly past the spot where he'd found the abandoned bull. "Roxanne, did you get any evidence?" "Better than that." She pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. "I took photographs, collected water samples, and documented license plate numbers. But when I tried to present this to county officials, I was told that trespassing on private property to gather evidence could result in criminal charges against me." "Private property?" "Turns out those old mining sites have been quietly purchased by shell companies connected to Crosswind Beef. They've been using abandoned mine shafts as illegal dumping grounds for chemical waste from their processing operations." Delbert examined the photographs Roxanne had taken, and what he saw made him physically sick. Images of trucks dumping barrels of industrial waste into pristine mountain streams, chemicals creating rainbow slicks on water surfaces, and dead wildlife scattered along creek banks. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I've documented, at least 2 years, but I think it started even earlier, probably right around the time Crosswind began their aggressive expansion into Wyoming ranching. So they've been poisoning our water supply to save money on proper waste disposal." "It's worse than that, Delbert. I think they've been deliberately contaminating ranch water sources to force family operations out of business. Look at this pattern." Roxanne spread out a hand-drawn map showing the locations of ranches that had been sold to Crosswind over the past 3 years. Every single property was either directly downstream from illegal dumping sites or within 5 miles of contaminated water sources. They poison the water, the ranchers' cattle get sick, the operations become unprofitable, and suddenly Crosswind shows up with generous offers to buy the land. It's a systematic campaign to steal family ranches through environmental terrorism. "Why haven't you gone to federal authorities?" "Because I'm scared, Delbert. 3 weeks after I started documenting the dumping, my barn burned down. Fire inspector said it was electrical problems, but I know better. That was a warning." The pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. Crosswind wasn't just illegally disposing of waste. They were using environmental contamination as a weapon to acquire valuable ranch land at below-market prices. "Roxanne, what do you think we should do?" "I think your abandoned bull is the missing piece of the puzzle. If we can prove that Crosswind was using their livestock as test subjects for chemical exposure, it connects the illegal dumping to systematic animal abuse and potentially to human health violations." That afternoon, Delbert called Dr. Phelps and asked her to conduct more comprehensive tests on Thunder Ridge Champion's blood and tissue samples. What she discovered confirmed their worst fears. "Delbert, this animal's system contains traces of at least 6 different industrial chemicals that are banned for use around food animals. The concentrations are consistent with chronic exposure over several months, which means Crosswind has been systematically poisoning their own livestock. For what purpose? Testing the effects of their illegal waste disposal on animal health. They've been using their cattle as laboratory subjects to determine how much contamination they can get away with before animals start dying. And when the animals get too sick to be useful, they abandon them in the wilderness and report them as lost to natural causes. It eliminates evidence while avoiding expensive veterinary care or proper disposal of contaminated carcasses. The scope of Crosswind's criminal enterprise was staggering. They weren't just violating environmental laws, they were conducting illegal medical experiments, falsifying government reports, and systematically poisoning entire communities. But as Delbert and Roxanne prepared to compile their evidence for federal investigators, they received visits that made clear just how dangerous their situation had become. That evening, Delbert answered his door to find Curtis Pemberton, the same man who had approached Roxanne months earlier about water testing. But now Pemberton's friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by cold professionalism that made Delbert's blood run cold. "Mr. Hartwell, I understand you've been asking questions about industrial activities in your area. I'm here to suggest that continued curiosity might be harmful to your health and your property values. Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice. Accidents happen to people who interfere with legitimate business operations. Barn fires, equipment failures, livestock deaths. Rural life can be very dangerous for folks who don't mind their own business." After Pemberton left, Delbert called Roxanne and discovered that she'd received an identical visit. The message was clear: stop investigating or face escalating consequences. But instead of intimidating them, the threats convinced both ranchers that they'd uncovered something enormous. Crosswind's desperation to silence them proved that the evidence they'd gathered could bring down the entire criminal operation. That night, as Delbert checked on Thunder Ridge Champion, he made a decision that would either save his community or get him killed. The bull was recovering rapidly now that the chemicals were clearing from his system, and his eyes showed the same determination that Delbert felt burning in his own chest. "Tomorrow we go to war, old boy," he told the animal quietly. "They picked the wrong ranchers to mess with." Thunder Ridge Champion seemed to nod his massive head in agreement, as if he understood that his suffering was about to serve a larger purpose, exposing the truth that could save dozens of families from corporate poisoning and environmental destruction. The next morning, Delbert woke to find 2 FBI agents standing on his front porch. Agent Rebecca Martinez and Agent David Chen introduced themselves with the kind of professional courtesy that immediately told him this wasn't a routine visit. "Mr. Hartwell, we understand you've been in contact with our Denver field office regarding environmental crimes in this area," Agent Martinez said. "We'd like to discuss what you've discovered." Delbert was confused. "I haven't contacted any FBI office. Someone did, using information that could only have come from your property. We received an anonymous package 3 days ago containing photographs, water test results, and veterinary reports detailing systematic environmental contamination and animal abuse by Crosswind Beef Corporation." The realization hit him immediately. Roxanne had contacted federal authorities without telling him, probably to protect him from retaliation if Crosswind discovered who was providing evidence. "Agent Martinez, I found an abandoned bull that belongs to Crosswind. The animal had been systematically poisoned with industrial chemicals, then dumped in the wilderness to die. My veterinarian can provide detailed medical evidence. We'd like to examine that evidence along with the animal itself. We're also interested in any documentation you might have regarding illegal waste disposal in this area." Over the next 3 hours, Delbert, Agent Martinez, and Agent Chen conducted a thorough examination of Thunder Ridge Champion, collected additional blood and tissue samples, and reviewed all the evidence that Delbert and Roxanne had compiled over the past several months. "Mr. Hartwell, what you've uncovered appears to be part of a much larger criminal enterprise," Agent Chen explained. "We've been investigating Crosswind Beef Corporation for 18 months, following reports of similar activities in Colorado, Nebraska, and Montana." "You mean they're doing this in other states?" "Crosswind has been using the same pattern across the rural West. Illegal dumping to contaminate family ranch operations, then acquiring the damaged properties at below-market prices. Your evidence is the first that directly connects their waste disposal to systematic animal abuse." Agent Martinez pulled out a thick folder containing documents that made Delbert's blood boil. "Crosswind has acquired over 40 family ranches across 4 states using this method. Each acquisition followed the same pattern: mysterious livestock illness, water contamination, financial pressure, then generous purchase offers. How many families have they destroyed? At least 200 families have lost generational ranch operations to Crosswind's illegal activities. The total value of stolen property exceeds $50 million. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, but what Agent Chen revealed next was even more disturbing. "Mr. Hartwell, we believe Crosswind is preparing to escalate their operations in Wyoming. Intelligence suggests they're planning to contaminate the municipal water supply for Millbrook within the next 2 weeks. The town's water supply? That would affect over 2,000 people." "Exactly. They want to force the entire community to relocate so they can acquire all the remaining ranch land in this valley. Your discovery of Thunder Ridge Champion may have provided us with the evidence we need to stop them." That afternoon, Agent Martinez arranged for Delbert and Roxanne to meet with the U.S. Attorney's Office via secure video conference. Federal prosecutors explained that their evidence could support criminal charges, including environmental terrorism, racketeering, fraud, and systematic animal abuse. However, the lead prosecutor warned, filing charges will put both of you at significant personal risk. Crosswind has demonstrated willingness to use violence and intimidation against people who threaten their operations. What kind of protection can you provide? Roxanne asked. Limited. We can arrange for increased FBI surveillance of your properties, but we can't provide around-the-clock security. You need to understand that cooperating with this investigation could cost you everything. Delbert looked at Roxanne, seeing the same determination in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. Agent Martinez, how many more families will lose their land if we don't stop Crosswind? Based on their expansion pattern, probably every remaining ranch operation in Carbon County within 2 years. Then we don't have a choice. That evening, as federal agents prepared search warrants and arrest warrants based on the evidence Delbert and Roxanne had provided, Curtis Pemberton made another visit to Delbert's ranch. This time, he wasn't alone. Mr. Hartwell, I gave you fair warning about interfering with business operations. Now I'm afraid we need to take more direct action. 2 other men emerged from Pemberton's vehicle, carrying equipment that was clearly intended for arson. But as they approached Delbert's barn, FBI agents who had been positioned around the property moved in with weapons drawn. FBI, drop your weapons and get on the ground. The arrest of Pemberton and his associates marked the beginning of the largest environmental crime investigation in Wyoming's history. Within 48 hours, federal agents had raided Crosswind's processing facilities, seized thousands of documents, and arrested 17 corporate executives and employees. The evidence recovered during the raids revealed that Crosswind's criminal enterprise extended far beyond illegal dumping. They had been bribing state officials, falsifying government reports, threatening witnesses, and conducting illegal medical experiments on both animals and potentially humans through contaminated food supplies. But perhaps most importantly, the investigation revealed that Thunder Ridge Champion wasn't just a victim. He was a survivor whose recovery and testimony would help convict the people responsible for poisoning entire communities. Dr. Phelps testified before a federal grand jury that the bull's medical condition provided definitive proof of systematic chemical abuse that violated numerous federal laws. The animal's recovery also demonstrated that proper veterinary care could have saved dozens of other cattle that Crosswind had abandoned to die in the wilderness. 3 months after Delbert found Thunder Ridge Champion dying in the Wyoming wilderness, Crosswind Beef Corporation faced federal charges that would result in over $100 million in fines and restitution to affected communities. More importantly, the investigation led to new federal regulations protecting rural water supplies and stronger penalties for corporations that use environmental contamination as a weapon against family farmers. As Delbert watched Thunder Ridge Champion grazing peacefully in his pasture, fully recovered and thriving, he reflected on how one abandoned animal had exposed crimes that affected thousands of people across multiple states. "You did good, old boy," he told the bull quietly. "Crosswind thought they could poison you and throw you away like garbage. Instead, you became the evidence that brought them down." Thunder Ridge Champion looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and Delbert could have sworn the animal understood exactly how important his survival had become to families throughout the rural West. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the most powerful evidence is found in the creatures that refuse to die quietly when powerful people try to silence them. 8 months after Thunder Ridge Champion's discovery, the federal courthouse in Cheyenne, Wyoming became the center of national attention as the Crosswind Beef Corporation trial began. Delbert found himself thrust into an unfamiliar world of media interviews, congressional hearings, and legal proceedings that would determine the fate of one of America's largest agricultural corporations. The prosecution's case was devastating in its scope and detail. Led by U.S. Attorney Patricia Kendall, federal prosecutors presented evidence of a criminal conspiracy that had systematically poisoned rural communities across 4 states while stealing over $50 million worth of family ranch properties. Thunder Ridge Champion became the star witness in a way that surprised everyone involved. Dr. Phelps testified that the bull's medical records provided irrefutable proof of deliberate chemical poisoning, while FBI forensics experts used tissue samples from the animal to trace the exact industrial chemicals that Crosswind had been illegally dumping into water supplies. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Attorney Kendall said during her opening statement, "this case is about more than corporate environmental crimes. It's about a conspiracy to destroy the American family farm through systematic poisoning and intimidation." The defense team, led by high-powered corporate attorneys, attempted to portray Thunder Ridge Champion's condition as the result of natural causes and predator attacks. They argued that Crosswind was being unfairly targeted for routine industrial practices that occurred throughout the agriculture industry. But their strategy collapsed when Agent Martinez presented evidence seized from Crosswind's corporate headquarters. Internal emails, financial records, and planning documents that revealed the full scope of their criminal operations. The most damning evidence came from Crosswind CEO Jonathan Brewster's own communications, which detailed the company's strategy of environmental pressure tactics to force family ranchers into financial distress. "We have successfully implemented Phase 3 contamination protocols in the Wyoming target zone," read one email from Brewster to his operations director. "Livestock mortality rates are tracking 23% above projected levels, and we anticipate forced sales beginning within 90 days. Another email discussed Thunder Ridge Champion specifically. "Recommend immediate disposal of test subject 7742. Animal has served its purpose in chemical tolerance trials and now represents potential liability exposure." Delbert testified for 3 days, describing how he'd found the dying bull and gradually uncovered the conspiracy that had been poisoning his community. His testimony was particularly powerful because of his obvious credibility, a working rancher with no political agenda who had simply tried to save a suffering animal. "Mr. Hartwell," Attorney Kendall asked during direct examination, "what motivated you to risk your own safety and financial security to expose Crosswind's crimes?" "Ma'am, I've been ranching this land for 30 years. My grandfather homesteaded here in 1923, and my family has always believed that taking care of the land and the animals is a sacred responsibility. When I found that bull dying from systematic poisoning, I knew I had to do whatever it took to stop the people who were destroying our way of life." Roxanne's testimony provided crucial corroboration of the environmental contamination pattern, while FBI agents presented evidence connecting Crosswind to similar crimes in Colorado, Nebraska, and Montana. The defense's case fell apart when Curtis Pemberton, facing 20 years in federal prison, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed that Crosswind had maintained a specialized rural acquisition team, whose sole purpose was to contaminate family ranch operations and force them into bankruptcy. "We had a specific protocol," Pemberton testified. "First, we'd conduct fake environmental surveys to map water sources and livestock patterns. Then we'd begin systematic contamination using industrial waste from Crosswind's processing facilities. When livestock started dying and families faced financial pressure, we'd arrange generous purchase offers through shell companies." "How many ranch families were targeted using this method?" Prosecutor Kendall asked. "Over 200 properties across 4 states. The total acquisition value was approximately $60 million, but we paid the families less than 40% of fair market value because of the contamination we'd caused." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 47 federal charges against Crosswind and its executives. CEO Jonathan Brewster was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, while the company faced $180 million in fines and restitution payments to affected families. But perhaps more importantly, the trial led to the passage of the Family Ranch Protection Act, which created new federal penalties for corporations that use environmental contamination to acquire rural properties and established a victim compensation fund for families affected by agricultural terrorism. The legislation also created the National Rural Crime Task Force, with Agent Martinez as its first director, specifically focused on protecting family farmers from corporate predation and environmental crimes. For Delbert, the victory was both personal and community-wide. The restitution payments allowed affected families to restore their contaminated properties, while new water treatment facilities funded by Crosswind's fines ensured that Carbon County's water supply would remain clean for future generations. Thunder Ridge Champion became a symbol of resilience and justice, with his story featured in documentaries, news programs, and agricultural publications across America. The bull remained on Delbert's ranch, where he lived peacefully as a reminder that sometimes the most important evidence comes from those who suffer in silence until someone cares enough to listen. On the first anniversary of finding Thunder Ridge Champion, Delbert stood in his pasture watching the bull graze contentedly in the Wyoming sunshine. The animal's recovery had mirrored his community's healing, slow, difficult, but ultimately triumphant. "You know what, old boy?" Delbert said quietly. "They thought they could poison you and throw you away like you didn't matter. Instead, you became the most important witness in American agricultural history." Thunder Ridge Champion looked up from his grazing and seemed to nod, as if he understood exactly how his suffering had helped save countless families from the same fate. The corporate war against America's family farmers had been fought and won, one abandoned bull at a time. 2 years after the Crosswind trial, Delbert stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Wyoming, delivering the keynote address at the first annual Family Ranch Protection Conference. At 56, he'd become an unlikely national spokesman for rural rights and environmental justice, traveling across the country to share the lessons learned from Thunder Ridge Champion's story. "Folks often ask me how one abandoned bull could bring down a multi-billion-dollar corporation," Delbert began, his weathered hands gripping the podium. "The answer is simple. Truth has power, but only when people have the courage to speak it and the determination to act on it." The audience included ranchers, farmers, environmental lawyers, FBI agents, and congressional representatives from across America, all united by their commitment to protecting rural communities from corporate predation. Dr. Phelps, now serving as the National Rural Crime Task Force's chief veterinary consultant, presented data showing that similar cases of environmental terrorism had been identified in 12 additional states since the Crosswind investigation began. "What we discovered in Wyoming wasn't an isolated incident," she explained. "It was part of a systematic pattern of corporate land acquisition that threatens the very foundation of American agriculture." Agent Martinez, who had been promoted to head the FBI's new Agricultural Crime Division, reported that federal investigations inspired by the Crosswind case had resulted in 67 additional indictments and over $400 million in restitution payments to affected farming families. But perhaps the most meaningful presentation came from Roxanne, who had used her portion of the Crosswind settlement to establish the Thunder Ridge Champion Foundation, providing legal and financial assistance to rural families facing corporate environmental crimes. 2 years ago, I was a scared widow trying to save my family's ranch from systematic poisoning," she told the audience. "Today, we've helped 47 families fight back against similar attacks, and we've won 41 of those cases." The foundation had become a model for rural advocacy, combining legal support with scientific documentation of environmental crimes and media attention that made it difficult for corporations to operate in secrecy. Following the conference, Delbert returned to Wyoming, where Thunder Ridge Champion continued to graze peacefully on the ranch that had become a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. The bull, now fully recovered and thriving, had sired several calves whose bloodline would carry forward the legacy of survival and justice. Local veterinary students regularly visited the ranch to study Thunder Ridge Champion's recovery from systematic chemical poisoning, while environmental science researchers used his case as a model for detecting and documenting corporate environmental crimes. But for Delbert, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the national recognition or legal precedence. It was the renewal of his community. Carbon County's ranching industry had not only survived Crosswind's attacks, but had emerged stronger and more unified than ever. The water treatment facilities built with Crosswind's restitution funds had attracted new families to the area, while the national attention from the trial had brought tourism and business opportunities that provided economic stability for the first time in decades. Young people who had left Wyoming for opportunities elsewhere began returning to work on family ranches that were now protected by federal legislation and supported by advocacy organizations inspired by Thunder Ridge Champion's story. Neville Kincaid, whose ranch had also been contaminated by Crosswind's illegal dumping, used his settlement money to establish a training center for sustainable ranching practices that attracted visitors from across the rural West. "What Crosswind tried to destroy became stronger than it ever was before," Neville observed as he and Delbert watched Thunder Ridge Champion teaching his calves to graze in the mountain pasture. They thought they could break us by poisoning our land and our animals. Instead, they taught us how powerful we are when we stand together. The ripple effects of the case continued to spread across rural America. State legislatures passed stronger environmental protection laws, federal agencies increased oversight of corporate agricultural operations, and family farmers gained legal resources that had never before been available. Most importantly, the story of an abandoned bull who refused to die quietly had inspired a generation of rural advocates who understood that protecting the land and the animals wasn't just about agriculture. It was about preserving the values and way of life that had built America. As Delbert walked through his pasture on the second anniversary of finding Thunder Ridge Champion, he reflected on how much had changed since that cold November morning when he'd heard the sound of an animal in distress. "You know what, old boy?" he said to the bull who approached for his daily scratch behind the ears. "They thought you were worthless enough to throw away. Turns out you were valuable enough to change the whole damn country." Thunder Ridge Champion responded with the gentle rumble that Delbert had learned meant contentment, as if the animal understood that his suffering had served a purpose greater than anyone could have imagined. The corporate war against America's family farmers hadn't ended, but the weapons of truth, courage, and community solidarity had proven stronger than money, lies, and intimidation. Sometimes the most important victories begin with one person caring enough to save a life that others consider disposable. And sometimes, the most powerful testimony comes from those who survive to tell the truth. An old bull was found in the Rocky Mountains, and what happened left the villagers amazed.